Okay.
This is an interview at the Microtel Inn, Auburn, New York, 24th of September 2003, approximately 10:45 a.m. Interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Walter Clark, Woodmansee. You have that?
Yes.
What was the other?
Date of birth and
Oh
place.
yes, October 16, 1921. And what was the third?
Where were you born?
Oh yeah, Hartford, Connecticut.
Okay. What was your educational background prior to entering service?
Just high school.
Do you remember where you were and your reaction when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Oh yes, oh very definitely. It was a Sunday afternoon, and a cousin and I were driving from Hartford to New Haven to visit friends. And when we got there, they told us what had happened. And like as for so many of us, I didn't even know where Pearl Harbor was. And so, as I say, that was generally the truth.
Yes.
Overall. We weren't as geographically conscious as people are now, but even now a lot of them are pretty ignorant. But anyway, yes, that was where I found out, and we caused quite a sensation. I never realized how soon my life would change thereafter.
Now, did you enlist or were you
No,
drafted?
I was drafted.
And they placed you in the Air Force, or did
That's
you...
right, yes. I
Okay.
was thankful for that. I had originally planned to enlist. My older brother had in the Air, was then the Army Air Force.
Yes.
And but my name was one of the first to come up in Hartford, and so it was too late for me to enlist, and I ended up where I wanted to be anyway.
Why did you like the Air Force?
Well,
Air Corps?
My brother and I both had been since kids, fascinated with aircraft and model airplanes, and observing them in the 20s and 30s. They were still rare enough so that when one flew over, you stopped and looked at it, that sort of thing. So that was the main impetus, and also I really didn't want to be in the infantry for a lot of good reasons.
Okay. Where did you go for your basic training?
Fort Devens, Massachusetts.
What kind of basic did you receive? Just the
Basic training. Well, at Fort Devens,
Anything
we're
specialized?
just there to get your uniforms and equipment and so on, and mainly for classification. I think those were the higher grades on the tests when they sent into the Air Corps, what was in the Army Air Corps, and they sent me to Miami Beach, which wasn't bad duty to start out, except that it was a summer, time, and I went into the service in June of '42, and I spent the summer in Miami learning to drill and march and so on what were then golf courses, what had been golf courses. Remember how hot and dusty it was. Quite an experience. And then we were classified there. You took tests, and let you have your selection into the discipline you would take, whether it was air or ground, and that was the breaking point. As an enlisted man, the only thing you could do as a flyer would be to go to aerial gunnery school, which I selected. Otherwise, you could have had a ground like armament work or mechanical, clerical, and that sort of thing. So I decided I'd take the chance and be a flyboy.
So where'd you go for gunnery school?
Tyndall Field in Pensacola, near Pensacola in Panama City, Florida. And that would have been, it's a 5-week course. And basically you learned a little about ballistics, and you actually shot at targets with 50 caliber machine guns that were being hauled by other aircraft, things like that. And after 5 weeks, lo and behold, isn't this a wonderful country? I was a sergeant. I had 3 stripes. And they sent me to Savannah, Georgia, which was a dive bomber outfit. Some of my friends went to medium bombers, some went to heavy bombers, which I would have preferred, but they sent me to Savannah, Georgia. It was Hunter Field, I think. And that would have been in the, around September or so of 42. And there I was assigned to an aircraft with a pilot and sat behind him with a flexible machine gun, you know, sort of observer protecting the rear of the aircraft. It wasn't very pleasant in those dive bombing runs. And didn't know what I would do. I hoped that they could get out of it in some way, and lo and behold, all of a sudden they terminated that program in the Army, left it to the Navy, the actual dive bombing, and they told me I could go to another discipline, so I selected radio school, and they sent me from the summer in the south, of course, to the cold north in the winter. And I was in Savannah right up until around after the first of the year, 43. So here I was reassigned to Sioux Falls, South Dakota to go to radio school. Well, when I got there, I got thinking, you know, maybe I should try to become an air cadet. And I applied and passed the tests. And I had to wait around for a month or two before they sent me to Santa Ana, California, which was quite a nice spot, especially after Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which was undergoing sort of an epidemic at the time. I remember very well that when I got there, the snow was up to your waist almost, and it was down near zero, and there was really sort of an epidemic going around because most of the people wore face masks. Well, before I got out of there, I really got sick myself, and it wasn't until I got into sunny Southern California that I got rid of this deep chest cold that went on and on. You know, it was really bad. But a very healthful, salubrious climate there in Southern California. And I really, with the pre-flight training there, as an air cadet, you really felt special because although the saying was that as an air cadet you had you were one rank above a Jap prisoner, because we had no rank really. We got paid, I think, something like equivalent of a sergeant is our $75 a month or something like that. And but the 9 weeks of pre-flight I put my body into about the best shape I've ever been in. You know, we had 2 hours of PT every day, and we had classes in the afternoon, and on weekends, Sundays, we had this close order drill parades, you know, and you were graded on them. Some reason or other, my squadron was one of the best because we won the awards, the weekly awards most of the time. I don't know why that was, but it just happened to be we had just a certain group of people together who worked well together. And the pre-flight was strictly basic things like math and aircraft identification, things like that, and military regulations and sort of preparing you for the advanced training. So after the 9 weeks, I went to Victorville, California for bombardier training. I was hoping to be classified as a pilot, but I'm left-handed, and when I was a little boy, the teacher said, "Walter, try riding with your right hand," when I was in the first grade, and I just proceeded to do that. So I found out that I was extremely ambidextrous in the Air Force. And with jiggling knobs, as you do at the bomb site, they classified me as a bombardier. They said, "We can't take the chance, you know, of giving you pilot training. If you wash out, you could come back probably as a bombardier and navigator. But your best discipline from your abilities right now is bomb." So I accepted it, and I've never regretted it, really, but I would have preferred to have a shot at pilot training. But, you know, it's wartime, and you do what they tell you to do. And so at Victorville, I was there about, I think it was, 11 weeks, I think, 12 weeks of advanced training, where you took courses in trajectory of bombs, and the science of dropping bombs, the flight trajectory of various types of bombs, and training on the Norden bomb site, which was then a highly classified instrument. It had just been developed, and it was far far advanced from anything else available anywhere else in the world. I found out later that the Germans had captured intact aircraft with a bomb sight and all, but they couldn't reproduce the bomb. It was so intricate, you know. So that it remained pretty much one of a kind throughout the war. And it was fascinating because what you did basically by turning the bomb sight knobs, you actually steered the aircraft. The pilot took over. The bombardier took over from the pilot and actually steered the aircraft in course and also with the bomb sight, and you corrected for that on the target, and then you also corrected for the rate of approach to the target, so that technically if you had the crosshairs on your target, and as the aircraft approached the target, if everything was right, your altitude, you know, and that sort of thing, the crosshairs stayed right on the target and you had a bullseye. And basically this was true in training at first. But then when you got into combat training where you had to fly evasive action and only had a short bomb run, then if you had time to focus on the target, you were lucky. Most of the time in combat there was flak popping around you, and you were not bombing specific targets, but by the time you got to a place like Berlin, it was covered in smoke so that you dropped your bombs on the smoke, which is true, really. When I was flying just after D-Day, well, I'll get to this later, but let's just progress chronologically. When I got my commission and wings, I had 10 days of absence of what was it called, between stations. I can't think of the term now, but basically I had 10 days to get from Victorville, California, home to Connecticut for a visit and back to Salt Lake City. So throughout my 3.5 years in the service, I never had any leave. It was wartime, and the only leave granted was to those, emergency leave, and even that was tough to get if you were overseas. Anyway, I did get home for a few days and back to Salt Lake City, where we were assigned crews. It took a while to get enough people organized to establish a 10-man crew, you see, and I was assigned to heavy bombers, by the way, so that was a B-17. And so after being assigned, I met the crew, and incidentally, our navigator was from Auburn, New York.
Yeah. Did you know him previously?
No, well, I met him.
Oh, that's right, you were from Connecticut.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
I met him, and maybe it's an interesting sideline is that his name was Joe Calisbrone, and we of course became good friends because we both shared the nose of the aircraft. And Joe was hit on one of the missions, injured, and I tried to doctor him up as best I could. It wasn't critical, it was not life-threatening, but I wanted to stop the flow of blood. It was in his lower back, and tried to, dress him as best we could. And it was a blessing in disguise for him because we were shot down. He was in a hospital. And he finished his tour and came home. And another interesting sidelines, I tried to look him up when I came to Syracuse University in 1946. But Joe then was living in Florida. And then when I came back, after I retired, I tried to look him up again, and I found out he had passed on. Yeah, so I never did get to see him again. But I met his family and his sisters. He had 4 sisters. So that's a sideline, though. Get back to the war. If I ramble, let me know. Ask me a question.
That's okay.
The combat training was in Pyote, West Texas, in P-Y-O-T-E, Pyote, a little town near Midland. And there your crew worked together as a unit, and you practiced, bomb runs and targeting. See, the B-17 bristled with machine guns all over it, and so you had a lot of aerial target practice and things like that. And I think that went on for a month or two. And then let's see, it would have been, I think, about in April of 44. We went to Nebraska, Grand Island, Nebraska, where we were assigned an aircraft to fly to ferry to England.
Mm-hmm.
And we went on the north route to Presque Isle, Maine, and then Labrador and Newfoundland and Reykjavik, Iceland, and then down to Scotland. And we landed in, so we were assigned to the 447th Bomb Group, which was in a little town called Stowmarket, in the area where most of the airfields were, and that was about 20 miles in from Ipswich in southern England. That would have been, I think, in April or May, and we spent the first month or two in training out of our base there.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't go on the pilot went on his first mission, I think, in late May of 44. And he went as a co-pilot, and then he took over our crew and we started flying missions. And
well, mostly your crew stayed together then, except for the gentleman that was wounded.
Well, wounded later. Yes, it did. Yeah. Okay. The radio operator lost a leg in a flak hit. Mm-hmm. But they were the only two injuries in our crew. Mm-hmm. And
did you keep the same aircraft, or?
No, because sometimes the aircraft got so badly damaged. You kept it if it was flyable. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But
did you ever get to name a plane?
Pardon?
Did you ever get to name a plane?
Oh yes, we did. Yeah, we did. It was called I'll Be Around. It was a new aircraft, but I think it was taken away from us later and given to another crew or something. Mm-hmm. You just didn't keep the same aircraft for a lot of reasons.
Did you ever decorate a jacket at all?
No, didn't have the time for one thing. Flew 19 missions. So I flew a number of practice missions first, and then I flew 19, but shot down on the 19th, and they were all in from the last of May to the June 29th, and that included D-Day. And the basic routine was you get up, you were called around 4 o'clock in the morning, and you ate breakfast, and you went for briefing and as to where the target was for the day, and the bombardiers were briefed on the IP, which was the initial point where you start your bomb run, and then the distance, the route of the bomb run, you release your bombs, and you take off for home. Mm-hmm. And these were all different targets every day, pretty much. And we did a lot of what they call strategic bombing, which meant hitting German cities and German targets. Concentrated on strategic targets like factories, armament factories, things like that, airfields, oil refineries, things like that, which were strategic. But basically, we had been bombing Germany for several years, and the RAF at night, so that most of the targets had been hit at least once. And sometimes you went back several times to one target if you didn't do a thorough job the first time. After D-Day, of course, we're all excited with D-Day, which was June 6th, 1944. Mm-hmm. And then we went on what was called tactical missions.
Can I ask you about D-Day? You said you flew 2 missions that day. What were your missions that day?
Well, they were over the hitting airfields and railroads behind the beachhead. Mm-hmm. And quite an experience seeing the airfields, or seeing the beachhead with the bay for several miles around, cluttered with ships. And of course, years later, reading about what was going on down there, and realizing that it was really a touch and go for a long time. Mm-hmm. If we hadn't had complete control of the skies, which we did and had for a long time, It never could have never happened really, because couldn't have happened because you need control of the sky, especially with a landing like that. So I would like to feel we did contribute to that, and but even at that, the boys on the ground paid a heavy price, paid a heavy cost. As I read about services, and after the war, a lot of studies were done. Actually, the type of work I was in was pretty hazardous. Not as bad when I was flying as it was in earlier years, when the 8th Air Force started flying. They just had a matter of a few hundred aircraft in the air, and they lost, sometimes 50% or more of their aircraft on one mission. And some of the bomb groups had turnovers over a period of a year. They had several turnovers. It was that tough, really. When I was flying, I guess your chances were about 50-50. And later, during the last year of the war, of course they improved for the fires, because when I was flying, they had just started to send 1,000 aircrafts a day on a mission, 1,000 heavy bombers. Now, that did not include the medium bombers and the fighters that were in support that you had with fighter aircraft. So you can imagine how large it was. And with the RAF flying at night, doing pretty much the same thing. Incidentally, they elected to fly at night because of the drain on manpower that flying daytime took. We had the people to do that, whereas the RAF didn't. And so they reverted to just flying at night. But it was a continual 24-hour day of bombardment of Germany, and really the whole country was, by the time the war ended, every German city was in ruins, really.
Did you mention some of the missions, some of the ones that may have been most hazardous, or?
Well, I'll mention 2 or 3, and then I'll tell you about my last one. Okay. Of course, most memorable is Berlin, because you're in flak there for, I would say the better part of an hour. They start throwing flak at you before you start your bomb run, and you're in it for 20 minutes after you leave the target. It's such a mammoth area, large area. So that was memorable because of the intensity and time that you were in those really hazardous conditions. The other missions were those that were in support of the beachhead on D-Day and after D-Day. Maybe several missions overall were of that type. You were rather routine. You had some flak, but not a lot. And on some of the missions, interestingly enough, those that were of that type could be the toughest in terms of accuracy of the flak. And I remember one occasion we were hitting Lyon, France, and there wasn't a lot of flak, but I guess they had zeroed in on us pretty well. And the flak was popping real close, and I remember that was the mission on which our navigator was injured. I went to various cities in Germany, and they were routine if you didn't get hit, in terms of your bomb run, dropping your bombs and leaving. And during my time flying, though, we never experienced any fighter attacks. Because we had such domination of the skies that I saw a few German fighters off in the distance, and if an aircraft were injured that had to leave the formation, then you might get hit by the fighters, things like that, if they were able to do that. But
I wanted to ask you about something you wrote about here, about flying supplies to the French.
Oh yes, I hadn't thought of that. That was a unique experience. It happened periodically. It was only one that I was on, but basically it was so unique in that you flew right over the treetops. You were down near ground level the whole way across France to the target, and the dropping of the equipment and the mountainous areas there, and then the flight back.
Now, what kind of equipment did you drop, and how did you do that?
Well, it was supplies, ammunition, and food supplies, and medical supplies, and things like that. To the what was it called? The French. Oh, I can't think of the
Resistance?
term. Maquis, M-A-Q-U-I-S, the French Maquis.
Oh.
And I've read books about them, of course, since the war. And basically, you just drop them out through the bomb bay doors. Yeah, you're just over the treetops, and you just drop them in the open fields there. And I don't know how many aircraft were involved in this sort of thing, but I'm sure they kept the French opposition to the German occupation pretty well equipped. Yeah.
Okay. I was just curious. I know you had written that down on your
Oh yes, yeah.
form. Okay. Okay. Do you want to tell us about your
My last
19th
mission? Yeah, okay. It was to Leipzig, which after the war became part of East Germany. We were hitting a synthetic oil refinery. And everything went well. There was the usual flak over the target. I watched a lot of the bombs hit the target well. And but after we left the target, the aircraft started to falter. And I noticed one engine was smoking, and my first thought was, please don't catch fire, please don't explode. We were fortunate in that everybody had time to get out of the aircraft. And the pilot had left it in autopilot, and the aircraft was doing a continual stalls like that, going around in a circular motion. So after I bailed out, I looked for other chutes. I didn't see any. But I watched the aircraft, and every once in a while it'd be pointed at me as I was going down. The aircraft was going down. That was a little scary. But I watched it hit in a forest area and explode. And I'm pretty certain that everybody was out of the aircraft. And I saw, after I was captured, kind of an interesting story, I came down in a forest area. It was very rural. And I put my hands, my arms over my head, over my eyes, and crossed my legs. And I came down through the trees, closed my eyes and came down through the trees. And when I stopped, my feet were about 2 feet off the ground, and my chute was hanging in the trees. So I had very little trouble getting out of my chute. I mean, you could very easily break a leg, you know.
Yes.
You're going something like 15 feet a second or something like that in the chute, with the chute. So I was lucky in that regard, but I pulled my chute down from the trees and I dove in some bushes. And I heard voices. It was a rural farm community. And I heard this woman's voice, believe it or not. I couldn't hardly believe what she said. "Where are you, Charlie?" Interesting. And they found me sooner or later. It was just local people, farmers with their own rifles and so on. They're probably as scared as I was when they found me. But the guy who located me, an old fellow with an old rifle, pointed at me and he said, "Pistola, pistola." And you want to know if I was armed? And I said, "No, I'm not." I said, "No." And the reason I wasn't was that we had been briefed not to carry sidearms in combat, because if you were armed, they're more likely to shoot you if you were shot down. And it wouldn't be of much value to you anyway, you see. So we didn't wear sidearms in the aircraft. Anyway, it turned out this woman was had lived in Brooklyn, and she said, "Oh, aren't we? Isn't it nice having a fine American boy with us?" And you know, she had liked living in New York, I guess, and I wasn't feeling so good myself, because previous to that, after that, they called the authorities, and they sent the civilian police to bring me into the nearby city, which I don't remember the name of. Oh, by the way, it was Burg, B-U-R-G, and it was near Magdeburg. Right about smack in the middle of Germany. And going from where I was captured to this city was about, I would say 2 or 3 miles, and I had to carry the chute. It was a hot summer day, and I still had my heated, electrically heated, flying gear on, and I couldn't make it. Finally, I just gave out, and they got one of the people to let me to use a bicycle and carry my chute out and into the city. In the meantime, I survived, and a lot of flyers who parachuted into Germany were killed by civilians. And matter of fact, this woman from Brooklyn said to me, she said, "Tell me, why is it that United States, England, and Russia are all picking on poor little Germany?" That was the propaganda that they thought that, that they didn't realize that Germany had started the war in 1939 when they invaded Poland. So it really tells you, it was very poignantly illustrated how propaganda can be so significant to, especially when it's...
Did you ever feel threatened by them at all, or?
Civilians?
Yes.
Oh yes. I was cussed at and spit at and yelled at along the roads, and one old guy hit me across the face with a stick or a cane he had. And but mainly it was just complete exhaustion. When I got there, I was panting, from the adrenaline was flowing, I was panting, but I hadn't had blood drawn on me. And when I got into this prison, in this jail in this community, there were 3 or 4 of my fellow crew, the co-pilot and about 3 of the gunners and other aircraft members, and they were all covered with blood. There had been beat up and bumps and blood all over their heads, and they'd been hit, and and I thought, oh, it's really pretty bad. But the aircraft apparently had gone on just another mile or so, so I got into another community. So I was lucky in that regard, and once I got my body back to breathing normally and so on, I remember the man in charge there at the jail asking me. He looked at my dog tags and he saw that I was an officer, and he asked me how old I was, and I wasn't going to tell him. I wasn't going to tell him anything. So the first and only time in my life, I didn't care whether I survived or not. I felt so out of it, But he was he got me a glass of water, and he cautioned me to drink it very slowly, things like that. He was being quite nice, but I still wasn't going to tell him anything, and I didn't. I guess he thought that I looked too boyish to be an officer, and I did probably. I probably looked too boyish now to be 82 years old, but that's the genes anyway.
Yeah.
Good luck all through my life. But anyway, I ended up being sent with the fellow prisoners. Oh my! In the meantime, shortly after that, the pilot was captured. Our first pilot. So the pilot and co-pilot, the 4 officers were there, but only 2 or 3 of the gunners. It's a crew of 10, so I never was able to account for about 3 of the aircrew, whether they survived the war or not. The usual routine, and this was a big business, you might say, for the Germans in terms of captured flyers. If you figure we flew a 1,000 plane mission, and probably the average loss was 60 aircraft. That's 600 young men a day that were sent to interrogation and processed and sent to a permanent camp. And they sent me to an interrogation center in Frankfurt. We went by train, as I remember, Boxcars, and there I spent several days in complete solitary. They gave you a slice of bread, German black bread with jam on it in the morning, some kind of thin soup at noon, and then another slice of bread in the evening. But I was so exhausted. And the only thing you had was in the room was a platform, a wooden platform, and you sat on that and slept on it. And I couldn't, I was so exhausted, I slept so much at a time for several days, really. They of course they had to ring a bell to go to use the bathroom facilities and so on. And then after they let you stew for 2 or 3 days, they could bring you in for interrogation. The first thing they tried to do with me was impress me with how much they knew about the aircraft and about the bomb site. They had captured the 4 officers together, so they knew that we were the crew. And I made a mistake. I had the bomb pins. After takeoff, you had to take the pins from the bomb site to arm the bombs. You see, when you're in flight.
Right.
And I still had the pins in my pocket when they captured me, so they knew I was a bombardier. Anyway, it didn't matter that much, but they did try to impress me, with what they knew about the bomb site, and of course what they were looking for was any new technology, which there was none that I knew of. But if they had any idea that I knew anything, they would have kept me there indefinitely. But they released all of us after, I think, about a week, and sent us to a permanent camp, which was Stalag Luft 3 in Sagan, Sagan, then in Germany, over in southeastern Germany, but after the war became part of Poland. The Russians, made it part of Poland. It became Zagan, Z-A-G-A-N. And I found out when I got there, it was the principal camp for American and British and our CAF, British and Australians and Canadians that were flying with the British. It was the main camp and there were 5 compounds, a center and 4 others, 4 north, south, east, and west. I was in the center compound. And 4 of the compounds were Americans, and 1 was British and Canadian, Australian. Each compound was a separate unit, and you want me to tell you a little bit about what prison camp life was like?
Sure. Yes.
Okay. Well, let's start out by saying that the POWs in Germany, and especially those who were POWs of the Luftwaffe, were better treated than anyone else. And being officers, we were better treated. We didn't have to work, but also I didn't mention there were 10,000 flying officers in our one camp. So you can imagine the magnitude of the operations there. Basically what they did was assign us in groups of 12 in each barracks building. And we got some food from the Germans, things like a little cheese, some potatoes, some vegetables, very little meat. After all, this was the last year of the war and the German people were starving. They weren't going to feed us very well. We did manage early on, after I was captured, the first few months, they did manage to get us Red Cross parcels from the North Coast, which really just about made it possible to survive. But even at that, especially later on at that camp, I was there from July until January. And as time went on, it got tougher for the German people, and they told us they couldn't get supplies to us, the Red Cross supplies to us. And so the rations were cut in half, and that was when I saw a lot of the people who looked fairly normal even start to lose weight. I ended up with my ribs showing pretty well too, but the worst was yet to come. Because in January of 1945, with the last Russian offensive of the war, they were within 100 miles of us, and they moved us. General Eisenhower had notified the Germans, announced that if you can't provide for the POWs, don't move them but they moved us anyway, and they gave us each one Red Cross parcel. So we had to, it was January, it was cold, there was snow on the ground, and we were standing out in front of the barracks, and they'd hand you a Red Cross parcel, and they said you're going to hit the road, and we didn't know how long we would have to walk and how much, you know, how much weight we could carry or anything. Well, basically, we carried what we thought we could handle, and the rest of it was dumped in the snow. And as we left the place, I'll never forget seeing all this food, all this parts of parcels, food, scattered all over the snow in a place where people had been hungry most of the time. And I imagine the civilians around there and the Germans, military, lived for quite a while on those. But it's one of the rather strange things about war that take place. I don't recall a lot of specifics about the time we spent on this march. It was about 4 days. The thing I remember mostly about it is being cold, and I had gotten past being hungry. You know, really, you just, after a while, you don't get hungry anymore, really. And
Did you have, what kind of, you just had your regular shoes?
Oh yes.
What kind of coat did you have?
We had a great coat, the type that the enlisted men wore in the military. They were provided through the Red Cross to us. I think at the time we were captured, or just shortly
Did you have
thereafter.
gloves and a hat at all, or?
I can't remember if I had gloves or not, frankly. We might have been provided with mittens of some kind, I don't remember. A hat, no. A lot of people made some kind of a headdress for themselves. And so, and if you could, you made a little sort of a backpack to carry. But basically, we walked and walked, and overnight we there was no place where you could get warm, any warm food. It went on for 3 or 4 days like this, and I think a lot of people couldn't make it and were repatriated, if possible, with all the confusion going on with the Russians approaching, you know, and that sort of thing. But most of us made it, and we ended up getting in boxcars, and I can't remember just where it was. It might have been a place called Chemnitz, C-H-E-M-N-I-T-Z, but I'm sure it's in the record somewhere. And a lot of people were involved here, and there have been books written about it too, by the way.
Yes.
And this is when they packed us, like you've seen pictures of the Germans going to the death camps in boxcars. Well, we had the same experience, packed in like that in boxcars. I think it was for 2 or 3 days too, and a lot of people were sick. And I wasn't sick at the time, but I can remember that them leaving the door open for sick people could make their way to the opening and relieve themselves in some way, you know. So it was pretty bad. We ended up down near Munich, and it was called Stalag 7A, I think, at a place called Moosburg, M-O-O-S-B-U-R-G. You probably heard of this from others, yeah. And that was chaotic, because they had, a lot of the prisoners had ended up down there, and there were no facilities for anybody. And finally, through the Red Cross, they made arrangements to ship over tents from Geneva. And so they set up these large tents, and we put straw in them, and that was home from January to April. I got pretty sick during that time, mainly my stomach, and everybody was in bad shape by that time, but not as bad as some of the other prisoners that, say, in Japan, where it was infinitely worse. The Germans at least attempted to show some recognizing of the Geneva Convention, which the Japanese never did. So we survived and managed okay. And on April 29th, which was 10 days to the day after I was captured, we heard we heard guns and rifle fire, and the German guards left, and General Patton came in to our camp. I'll never forget meeting him, and ordered the baker unit up pronto, and they started baking bread for us, and things like that. So I'll have to then after that I'll have to go into a phase where I went AWOL. Two other guys and I, and quite a few others. After we're liberated, we're supposed to wait for C-47s to take us to the coast, fly us. Several days went by, and a lot of the guys were getting restless, and including Walter Woodmansee. So two friends and I decided to take off, and we made our way into Munich. And this was just a week or so after Munich fell. And it was quite an experience, and we got tied in with an ordnance outfit. And we went through their chow lines. But I found, my two friends had no trouble eating, but for myself, I don't know. I had no appetite, and I could hardly eat anything. I ate a little, but I had no appetite. And this went on for several months after the war, after I got home. But anyway, I did manage. I got enough into my stomach to stay that that I was doing okay, and we managed to find a car that had been liberated in some way. The ordnance people gave it to us, and they registered it, and so it had numbers on the side and everything else. So the three of us took off in his car and headed west. And it was fascinating because as you left Munich, we could see that part of the Autobahn had been camouflaged green, and fighter aircraft were still adjacent to this, what was an airstrip really, you say. The planes were still there and camouflaged. And this one, we traveled west, and it was tough going because all the bridges pretty much been bombed out, and if you could get across some, fine. We finally got to the point where we just couldn't go any further, and we just abandoned the car and got talking with a U.S. officer who was in charge of routing gasoline supply tanks from the coast into the troops, and we managed to get a ride back to the coast on one of those. I got back I saw some of the people that I had known at the camp. They in the meantime, they'd been flown out, and we all got there about the same time. But we could have been subject to discipline, I guess, but we weren't. No, I don't think anybody was. And so we got after a few days, we were put on a converted Italian luxury liner, and came back to the States. When I came into Fort Dix, we were all given 60 days R&R, and we're told to report back to Atlantic City, where the Air Force had taken over for R&R there. So I had 60 days at home. My mother had the pantry stocked with food because all the neighbors heard I was coming home, and they gave my mother their ration coupons to provide food for me. And I finally went to a doctor in downtown Hartford, a specialist on the stomach, I guess, and I've talked this over with the VA since then, because I was given a 10% disability for stomach ailments. But I went to a doctor on my own in Hartford, and I don't know what pills he gave me, but they were like magic, because within 2 or 3 weeks, my appetite was back to normal. In fact, I was hungry all the time. I started to get back. I think my weight was down to about 115.
How much weight had you lost? How much
I
weight
was
had you
about
lost?
145 during my best years. Yeah, I'm at 150 now. All my ribs showed, but there was no permanent damage really. I have had stomach problems all my adult life since then, but nothing serious. Usually it's just got to be very careful on diet, and I take antacids and things like that if I need them. But mainly watching what I eat, watch the fats and things like that. So after 60 days R&R at home, I went to Atlantic City, New Jersey, and found out quite suddenly that the war was. They figured the Japanese were about to surrender, and our services weren't needed in the Pacific. You know, in the meantime, they had been using B-29s in the Pacific, and they were a new technology compared to the Norden bomb sight, because the bombs then were dropped electronically from the cockpit. They didn't have bombardiers even. So my services weren't needed, and I guess a few pilots managed to stay in. My best friend did. He was from Montana, and my best friend all through my POW months. And he was a fighter pilot, and he stayed in, and he made a career of it. So all of a sudden, I was faced with being a civilian again. What am I going to do? When I was a POW, though, I have an interesting story I forgot to tell you about. When I was Stalag Luft 3, the first permanent camp, we got BBC News by a grapevine. Well, the word was that some way or other, the RAF, and of course they've been in POWs there since '39, you see, some way or other they got put a radio together, and they could get the BBC News, and it was passed by a system over into each compound, each of the 5 compounds, and so every day we had a routine where we posted guards at each door, front and back of each building, to watch for Germans, and we got the BBC News. And it was quite a between what they told us on the BBC and what the Germans told us, we could get a pretty good idea what was going on. That was quite an interesting thing. I also didn't mention that at the POW at Stalag Luft 3, the first few months weren't that bad. We got good parcels. We managed to even play a little softball and throw a football around a little bit, things like that. And there was a theater group and a choir and church services and a lot of books to read. So you managed not too badly. And I'll have to admit, in some ways, it was certainly relaxing compared to flying combat missions. You didn't know what your future was, but at least you weren't, under that day-to-day stress. If you could handle the isolation and the boredom, and you learn to handle things like that. I could handle it better than I would now, as I look back. Even flying the missions, heavens knows there are a lot of people that were under a lot more pressure than we were. The beachhead and Marines that were hitting the beaches in the Pacific. I mean, at least if I made it back from my mission, I would have had a warm bed and a hot meal, so I'm not complaining. But there was a lot of day-to-day pressure because there was no let-up. And fortunately, you only had to fly 35 missions, and so I was more than halfway through. And so I guess you took the approach that there's always going to be the other guy. You have to do that, or you won't make it. Even at that, there were people that couldn't handle the pressure and were grounded, really. So I forgot to mention that. But
Well, after discharge, did you use the GI Bill?
I sure did, and so it brought me to New York State.
Okay.
And believe it or not, we heard about this when we were POWs at Stalag Luft 3.
The GI Bill.
The GI Bill. We heard about it from the BBC News, and everybody, oh wow, what a wonderful thing, So we knew about it, and so I applied when I came back, and I was interested in writing. So I thought I might try journalism school. I applied at Columbia and at Syracuse University. Well, at Columbia, I was accepted, but I would have had to go through 3 years of pre-journalism, whereas in Syracuse, you could start working journalism courses right away. So I wanted to go to a co-ed university. So that's how it brought me to Syracuse. I ended up meeting a young woman from Syracuse on campus. Her name was Helen Abbott. And I met her in January, and in August we were married, and we've been together now for 57 years.
Wow.
And 4 kids and 6 grandchildren.
Did you ever make use of the 5220 club?
You mean
The unemployment, 52
No, I
weeks,
didn't.
$20?
No, I didn't, because I arrived home after being separated from the service. They sent me, I'll tell you an interesting story en route home. So in Atlantic City, I was all of a sudden given okay to accept discharge from the service. They told me that with my discipline, bombardier, you can stay in, we'll try to find a spot for it, but there's a good chance you'll have to leave anyway, you see. So I took out, and a friend and I, a guy I had met there at Atlantic City, who was also a flyer. We were en route from Atlantic City to Fort Devens, Massachusetts. And on the way we started to hear horns blowing, sirens, people in the streets. What was going on? We went through the Lincoln Tunnel into Manhattan and hit wall-to-wall people. Couldn't travel, couldn't go anywhere. And we made it, we managed to find a place to park near Times Square and found out that the war had ended, that the Japanese had surrendered. It was, I think August 6th, was it, or something like that? Yeah. Quite an experience. I was hugged and kissed by more beautiful women. And free drinks for everybody in all the bars. And so, anyway, make a long story short, my friend and I, I think probably around 4 o'clock in the morning, the streets were deserted enough so that we could continue through New York and go to my home in Hartford and then on to Fort Devens. Quite an experience. A nice way to end the war, I guess.
Yes. So you stayed in contact with others that you met during your military service?
No.
No?
It just never worked out. And I think I have been in touch with a couple of them. The pilot apparently, when we were together as POWs, he was from Chicago, and he said that he didn't want to fly after the war. He not interested in flying at all after the war. And I think because it was such an unpleasant experience as being a POW, he never made an effort to get in touch with me, and I never made an effort to get in touch with him. The co-pilot stopped by my house not long after we were, would have been in the fall of 45. And I didn't mention that I had taken the job at Pratt & Whitney Aircraft. I'd worked there before the war, and they were required to take it. So between my separating and leaving in January for university, I went back to work there. That was why I never went on the 5220. Anyway, so I did see the co-pilot. He visited me in Hartford, and I visited him in Massachusetts. And he eventually went back to Chicago. He was from Chicago also. The radio operator, the one who had been injured and left the crew, he was from Santa Monica, California, and the phone rang one day after I retired. It would have been around the early 80s. And he had been in touch with one of the gunners, who was from Indiana. And so I talked with the radio operator a few times on the phone, and I often thought if I ever went to the West Coast I would have visited him, but I never did. That was quite a few years ago. So I was in touch with a few of the crew, but it would have been nice to have a reunion, but I guess the people weren't that interested, in getting together all over the country, and I think people that had long periods of time, like in Vietnam together, or as infantrymen together in the war for months and months, there was a bigger bond there. See, we were together in combat only for less than a month, you see, and just 2 or 3 months as a crew.
Okay. Well,
So that's the general picture, I
all
guess.
right. Well, thank
Yeah.
you very much for your interview.
Yes.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it.